My name is David Nyzio. I'm an artist, a sculptor, an naturalist, a bird watcher, plants person, and I'm here to talk about my art. I'm just gonna talk about my history from, the very beginning pretty much, because it influenced my art. And my art is generally connected to my interest in natural history, which goes back to when I was a child. So I'm basically going to go in chronological order and show some early works up to present and talk about my relationship with the materials to my history. Well, I went to college for a long time. I went to undergraduate school at UMass in Amherst, and then I left that school and I got my BFA at Southeastern Mass University. And then I went to graduate school at Penn State, and then I left Penn State and went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn and got my MFA in sculpture from Pratt Institute.
Welcome everybody, thanks for coming out. This event is made possible by an FEP grant from the Broward College Student Life Department. This is the second event in a 7-part series titled Future Environments. The selected speakers address environmental and social concerns regarding changes in climate, ecology, natural resources, as well as our increasingly complex relationship with emerging technologies. If you'd like to hear about the other events in the series, make sure you put your email on the survey. And if you have time at the end of the night, please fill out a survey for us so we can hear about your experience. These speakers have invented their own creative use of materials and processes, transcending traditional ideas of what it means to be an artist in the 21st century. David Nyzio, our speaker tonight, earned his MFA from Pratt Institute in 1986 and lives and works in New York and has exhibited internationally since 1992. Including solo exhibitions in the Netherlands and Denmark, as well as at prestigious institutions in the US like Andrea Rosen Gallery, the Brooklyn Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and MoMA PS1. He has been awarded numerous honors, including grants from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, Art Matters, and the Shifting Foundation. And reviews of his work can be found in Art Forum, Art in America, Village Voice, the Boston Globe, the New Yorker, and the New York Times, among others. Throughout his life, David has been profoundly influenced by the extraordinary beauty and vastness of natural history, marveling at the diversity and richness of form, down to the most finely structured surface. In 1999, David moved his family from New York City to a 52-acre wetland property in Stone Ridge, New York, and since then has been giving considerable attention to the landscape, managing the wetland for biodiversity, which he calls the Dynamic Succession Management Project. A predisposition as a tinkerer has resulted in David's diverse group of work, each forged from a different constellation of events. He has seamlessly incorporated his interest in entomology and biology using materials like algae, butterfly wings, milkweed bugs, anthracite, and other natural materials, and even employed sheep and beavers in the making of his work. Art critic Fred Benheim calls David a heterodox alchemist who melds science and art to create a rare hybrid. Though he studied art, Nyzio is a self-educated scientist applying his biological discoveries to his art. His working procedure consists of noticing an aspect of nature, such as the refraction of light on butterfly wings, and then incorporating this observation into art. The resulting work has a broad appeal because of its combination of natural materials with sophisticated ideas about art and nature. Please join me in welcoming David Nyzio.
Thank you, that was very generous. So yes, I spent a long time sitting around in the swamp and playing in the woods when I was a kid. So all this work is basically inspired by that history. I'm going to go in chronological order from like early pieces when I was at grad school and undergrad school, and just go in order because I think it's important to see a progression and you can kind of see a sequence of how things come about. And a lot of times my work is inspired by other work, so it kind of comes out like branches on a tree. So I'm just going to start at the beginning, or kind of the beginning. This is a piece I made in undergraduate school. It was like in the late 70s, and I liked, like a lot of parts of aspects of natural history, I like crystals and minerals. And this is basically inspired by a piece of pyrite, I guess. This is the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone. Have you ever been there? And for a long time I've been interested in bacteria, the thermophile bacteria in these pools. And I started, I had a lot of bacteria and algae growing in my aquarium when I was a kid, and I liked it more than the fish and things. So I kind of decided that I wanted to use a primitive organism in my work that wasn't too complex, and I thought algae and bacteria would be perfect. So I started doing work with algae and bacteria and growing it on substrates. So I guess I came up with this idea to use golf balls to grow this moss and algae on, maybe because I was a caddy and I used to see the golf balls in the ponds, and it was always covered with green. So I thought, oh, I'll grow moss and algae on golf balls. This piece is called The Perfect Progression of Random Spacing. And this is another piece I did in the Brooklyn Bridge anchorage. And the substrate in this situation is this 23-foot high curtain made out of 2 scrims of polyester. And basically I have 2,000 watt metal halide parking lot lights shining on this big curtain, and there's a trough of water below it. And the water just flowing up into this hem, and then flowing down the curtain, and the algae is growing on the curtain. And one of the problems with this is the water would evaporate because of so much surface area, so I had to run over there every week and put 50 gallons of water in it. And the bathroom was like a mile away from the place, so it was kind of a exhausting situation. These are some pieces done around the same time. These 3 pendants are about 3 feet in diameter discs. And they're these flat 1-inch, kind of like petri dishes. People didn't really know how to describe these. I wanted to make an aquarium, but a vertical, flat aquarium that was more like a painting. And there's 3 different currents in this and 3 different kinds of algae. The first one, the current's going from the outside down the middle. The second one is halfway filled, and the third one, the current is going from either side, and there's a substrate of porcelain on the inside of that one. As you see, I'm going to be skipping around. I'm not really skipping around. I always work on a lot of different things at once. So the same time I was making those algae things, those pieces, I was working on this butterfly piece made out of morpho-aga butterflies. I met this woman who inherited this collection from her father. She had all these wings of this morpho-aga, and she just had thousands and thousands of these wings, and she says, oh, they're really cheap because I don't have the whole butterfly, I just have these wings. And I said, well, those are beautiful. I'm going to, I'll buy all these wings from you. So I made this big surface. This piece is, I think, 7 feet high by 4 feet wide, and it's about 4,000 wings of morpho-aga. But what I did was I made a punch out of razor blades, and I punched out squares. Because I didn't want to really use the butterfly wing. I didn't want to just talk about the butterflyness. I wanted to talk about the structure of the scales. And what happens is that the scales change because of the orientation of the tiny scales made out of chitin, which is a material insects are made out of, these butterfly wings. So what I did was I oriented the squares all in the same direction. And the whole piece changes at once when you walk by. So if you look at it from one side, it's this kind of brown color. And then if you look at it from the other side, it's this blue color, and there's a whole transition that happens in between. As you can see, there's like a top half and the bottom half. So the top half is all the upper wings of the aga, and the bottom half is the hind wings. So there's actually the top part of the butterfly is in the top, and the bottom half is in the bottom. And this piece is the same
agar wings. It's about 24 by 24 with the same size squares, but this piece is called target orientation. So what I did was I drew a target behind it, and I kept the orientation of the wing on the target always the same as it was following the circles around, and I kept the tool just oriented horizontally and vertical square to the square every time I punched the square out. So the orientation of the wing is actually spinning, but the squares are all staying the same. So as you walk by this piece, the whole thing kind of spins. So at the same time I'm doing that, and I'm making these algae pieces, I started using agar, which is made out of red algae, which is a seaweed, but it's actually an algae. And I was growing some algae and bacteria on petri dishes in agar, and then I discovered that I could make plastic out of it by making these shapes and letting them evaporate for a long time. So I was making these shapes and letting them evaporate, and then I made some nuts and bolts out of the agar, and I'm a machinist and a metalworker, so I could make screws. So I made these screws, and I bolted together this, this base out of this agar, and I used a piece of glass on top, and then I used thin pieces of agar to make these envelopes on top of the table, which inside the envelopes is this fiberglass that has algae growing on it. So it's this convoluted thing, but basically this whole piece is made out of glass and algae, and the envelopes are supposed to be representing seeds. And I put, before I made the agar, I put nutrient in the agar. So in theory, these envelopes could go through the mail, they could fall into the water, and then the algae that's on the fiberglass inside the envelope would rehydrate and start growing, and the envelope would contain nutrient for the algae to grow. And at the same time I was making these slides. This is actually I guess maybe you don't even know what a slide is, possibly, but these have these slides, you put the slide projectors that were a little piece of plastic with an image on it. So what I did was I made slides out of agar, this clear plastic, and then I did tiny little photo silk screens on the agar slide, and I could put it in the slide projector and project it. So then I would have a slideshow of actual photo silk screens on algae. But now I had to scan that, so now it's like a very convoluted thing where it's a digital image from a silk screen on a slide. The slide's made out of algae, and it's not even a picture, it's a silk screen. So it's kind of complicated at this point. This piece, I did 3 of these, 2 of them with stumps. This is kind of complicated because it's a kinetic piece. There's a layer of magnets on the top piece that makes a particular pattern, and then there's a shaft that goes down the middle, and there's that aluminum disc that's underneath that. And on top of the aluminum disc is another pattern of magnets that's stronger than the top pattern of magnets. So you get a pattern from the top layer, and then another pattern that's being produced by the bottom layer. So when you spin these discs, you get you get a moire of the 2 magnetic patterns. Those are iron filings on top. They dyed this orange color iron filings. And that's a stump that I got in the park that had graffiti all over it. And there's another piece that's sort of similar, that's showing the double moire on the top, made out of a curly maple stump. And you'll see throughout my work I use trees and stumps periodically. This is around the same time I did a couple pieces with trees with fences inside them. And this I found in Brooklyn. This piece I found in a wasty area in the back of Brooklyn. There was a lantus tree growing right through this chain link fence. And I was like, wow, look at this tree, it's going right through this fence. So I cut around the fence where the tree was going through, and I cut the tree down, and because I wanted to see what the interface looked like inside the tree where the fence was going through. So if you look, you can't really see this so close, but you can see some of the areas, the fence you can see, some of it's still buried in the tree. This is a piece made out of this plaster, kind of similar to the piece I'm going to demonstrate tomorrow. It's a magnetic pattern caused by a layer of magnets, and then iron filings make the pattern. The iron filings oxidize. There's also a photo silk screen image with bronze I think it's a bonsai tree from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. So I think of this as a really sculptural, traditional piece because it's made out of plaster, bronze, and steel. Very traditional sculptural elements, except in this case it's more like a imagery or a pattern. This is another piece. I started growing milkweed bugs. If you take entomology class, milkweed bugs of Nipra, they're a true bug and they have instars, so if you want to study entomology and you have basic class, they'll show you, you'll raise these milkweed bugs and you'll look at the instars. So I raised a bunch of these and I pinned them in a big pile. This is right when Mount St. Helens blew up, so I made this little form out of Mount St. Helens. I don't know why, it was just like some random thing. And I pinned the milkweed bugs in this pile. They're black orange, and most insects don't like to eat them because they're kind of like monarch butterflies, black and orange, kind of a indication that, I'm toxic. And then I started doing these bug excrement pieces from these same milkweed bugs. I was wondering, they would shit, when I was raising them, they would make all this shit everywhere, and I was just like, I wonder if I fed them ink, if they would shit different colors. So then this piece, I raised, I put blue ink in these, I have a big piece of paper basically, and I made an area of water, and I put some cotton balls for them to lay eggs in. And basically they were in some food, they eat sunflower seeds. They were eating sunflower seeds and drinking this blue water. And then they would just shit in different kind of like hues of blue. Some would be not so blue, some would be a little bit purpley. They were actually sort of separating the colors in their body. And it didn't kill them, it was this non-toxic ink. This one was red ink, so that one was blue, this one was red. I did another one, this is blue, and you can see, this is a close-up of the tubing. I made this plexiglass tubing filled with the ink, and what I did was I put these little wicks that came out of these holes in the top. So the milkweed bugs would go and they would suck the liquid out of these wicks, and then they would crawl around and they would shit everywhere and die. And then eventually I just took everything out, and what you're left is with this water trough in the middle, and then those round circles of the little petri dishes full of sunflower seeds where they would eat. And you could see there's certain areas they like to go to more than, because I was kind of curious within the system where they would go, where they have preferences, where they would like to go on the edges, and they seem to like to go on this bottom edge for some reason. I might have had some lights on that side, so maybe they like the light. That's kind of a little bit close-up of, can't really see it very well. And this piece is called Marvelous Neoteny. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the word neotenic or neoteny. It's kind of fascinating to me. Some amphibians go through this stage, is where you can retain juvenile characteristics and reproduce in these juvenile characteristics. So for instance, there's some amphibians like a spotted salamander, and in the desert where their range goes into the desert, it's kind of detrimental for these salamanders to go and live on land. So normally salamanders would lay eggs in the water, the eggs would turn into larvae, they'd have gills, and then they would turn into adults, climb out of the water, and live on land. But in some cases it's not very useful or helpful to crawl on land, so they just stay in their juvenile larval stage, and then they reproduce in their larval form. I always thought that was such a great thing to be able to do. Axolotl is a Mexican salamander that's very famous. Mud puppies, you might have heard of mud puppies. And I just thought, so I wanted to make these big rubber salamanders, kind of, and morphing into this black one. And it was sort of like, they were almost like toys, and it sort of reminded me of being an artist, where you're retaining these juvenile characters and turning them into adult, but you're still playing with these like big rubber things. So it was kind of like a self-portrait maybe. But the weird thing what was strange about this piece is the three first ones are made out of silicone, and the last one's made out of black tuffy, which is a different kind of rubber. And for some reason, that black one always fell off the pedestal. And my dealer would say, Dave, every morning I come in and that black one's on the ground. And I put it back and it stays there all day, and when I come in the next morning, it's on the ground again. And I was a little bit curious because it's like this progression, and the last one's losing its gills, and it's almost doing some other transition. And that was the one that kept falling off the pedestal. I thought that was kind of odd. So I ended up having to put a piece of sandpaper under it so it would not keep jumping off. This is a very strange piece. As you can see, I'm all over the place kind of, and I'm doing these kind of different kind of materials. One of my friends used to work at the Stone Zoo in Boston, and they had this orangutan, and had these huge dreadlocks. It was all, orangutans live in the forest, and they make nests every night, and their fur never gets all dreadlocked because they're active and they're preening. But this was a really bad situation in a zoo. It was very immobile. It was just sitting in its, crap, and it had these big dreads all over it. So they sold the orang, or gave the orang to a different zoo in Chicago, I believe, and when they were shipping it, it died on the way. But before they shipped it, they shaved all its dreadlocks off, and I think maybe it bummed out because it had all its fur, shaved off. So my friend had this piece of orangutan dread, and I thought it was kind of an amazing thing. So I juxtaposed it, I don't know why, I just decided to juxtapose it to this hair piece. This is made out of human hair. I went to the hair store and I bought different colors of hair, black, brown, red, and blonde. Red and blonde hair was really expensive. Black hair was really pretty inexpensive. So then I just made a braid that was like about 200 yards long, a tiny braid, and I had my friend Pam knit it into this sweater. So then I made this vessel that was kind of like a laboratory beaker, and I fitted the sweater over this laboratory vessel, and I juxtaposed it to the hair of the orangutan. I think it was very curious. People didn't know what the heck the deal is with this piece, but I don't know. I guess that's okay. This is one of these plaster pieces with the bronze powder, similar to that one with the magnetic pattern with the iron filings, but this is just a photo silk screen with bronze powder, except it's not bronze powder in this case, it's pennies. So I was in Costa Rica at La Silva Research Station, which is a really great birding place, research station. This was like 25 years ago. There was this really beautiful bridge that was going across the river there. And, they always need money to maintain these places. So I was like, okay, I'm going to grind up all these pennies and take the copper powder and make this photo silk screen, and then that kind of pile to the right is actually the pile of leftover pennies after I ground up the powder. The sad thing about this whole situation is a friend of mine, Andrew, is making a field guide to Central American birds right now, and he goes down there all the time. I used to go down there with him. And I asked him about La Silva, how it's doing, and he says, oh, it's totally trash now. There's no more birds there. It's all been totally, surrounded by banana plantations and palm nut and stuff, so it's not even a viable habitat anymore, and it used to be one of the prime habitats there. Across my studio, there was this, in Brooklyn, in Red Hook, there was this lot that was all full of glass. I don't know if they ever did that here, but they used to make this stuff called glassfalt. They would grind up bottles, and they would mix it in with the asphalt. And I don't know why, I guess just to make use of a filler or get rid of the glass. And it was this incredible lot full of this glass, and there were all these weeds growing in it, because basically the ground up glass is like sand, and a lot of these weeds and different kind of plants don't really like a lot of nutrient. Like in the desert, a cactus doesn't really need nutrient, or much nutrient. So this lot was beautiful. It was like this shimmering glass with all these weeds and plants growing through it. And I was just taking pictures of all the different, times of the day, and the bottles, and the weeds, and the pigeons. These are pigeons, like, walking around in the glass, different kind of lighting effects. And then I was, like, taking the pictures later and later at night and using different exposures, and it was just getting sort of darker and darker, and then it was just like these constellations of outer space. And I just thought it was kind of cool to see this sparkly glass. So that's a close-up of just what the lot looks like. This is one of my early algae pieces. I discovered that growing this oscillatoria, it's called, that I could make photographs. I set up a piece with growing algae in a tray of water, and it ended up casting a shadow, and I could see that the water was, the algae was growing only where the light is and not where the shadow was. I said, wow, it's so sensitive. So then I decided to make photo negatives and then project light through a negative, and realized I could make photographs. So this is like a 4 by 8 foot piece. It's a self-portrait, kind of a long time ago. Metal halide light. This piece is in the museum in Honolulu. I made like 2 of these, or 3 of these. I also made this one, which is an Ansel Adams photograph at Yosemite. I think it's called Apple Trees in Winter. And the right-hand side is just kind of an experiment with some glass balls on the paper. And the one on the left is this snow scene, which you can't really see it, but in the background is Half Dome. So basically, I make a tray of water. I put the paper on the bottom of the tray. The water's like about 1 inch deep. And I put nutrient in the water, and I put this culture called oscillatoria. And it takes about a month. And I put the negative on top, and I project a light through it. It's got to be a bare light bulb, so it's casting a nice clean shadow. So I use a 1,000-watt metal halide. And I've done, several of these at this point. This one is a little bit different. I did it in a tray of water with glass on the bottom, and I projected the light through the bottom of the tray with a negative underneath. And this is an Islamic piece. There's stone screens from the Middle East. I went to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum, and I talked to the curator there, Dr. Carboni, and I love these big stone screens. Stone screens are these kind of dimensional stone screens. They have this Moorish kind of pattern, but they're actually like 8 inches thick, and they use them to let air circulate through these buildings, but because there's so much sand blowing around, the air blows through these screens, and the sand is trapped and it's stopped, so you don't get sand blowing around in the interior of some of these spaces, but you still get air circulation and light coming in. This is a system, kind of, this is called Advanced Model in a State of Torpor. And it kind of stems from those early ones I showed you with the discs. This is 2 separate discs next to each other. One has a current that just goes in a spiral, like around the outside, and the other one has an irregular current. So you can see from the back, it's 2 tanks kind of suspended. The thing that's kind of complicated about this and hard to describe is that there's photo silk screens on the inside of the glass made out of silicone. And I realized that when this algae goes through different stages of reproduction and deterioration, the film, the mucilage of the film breaks down and starts to lose adhesion. But it loses adhesion first on the glass and second on the silicone. So I figured I could do a photograph of the silicone and it would get algae on it, but then as it went through, the algae went through the stages, it would lose adhesion on the glass, and the images would become more defined over time. It worked to a degree, but I think that the current was never strong enough to wash the algae away enough, so it was kind of blurry. So I was going to put a bigger pump on it, but I never did because I got distracted and started doing other things. This piece I was doing at the same time, it's another Morpho Aga piece. with random squares. So it's all kind of sparkly. Instead of having like that directional kind of change, it's just like a random sparkly change. And then the outside is mirror stainless steel made into facets, all triangles. And this is another algae piece I was doing around the same time with this. There's a guy named Alfred Russel Wallace. I don't know if you've ever heard of Alfred Russel Wallace. He was basically discovering natural selection at the same time Charles Darwin was. And I always really liked Alfred Russel Wallace, and he was sort of the underdog for me, because he and Darwin would work at the same time doing sort of the same thing, but Darwin had some money and he had like lots of support, and this guy was kind of a blue-collar worker. He was an academic and he taught at a school, and he didn't have a lot of money. And then he went to South America on a big expedition, and he was coming back with all his specimens, and his boat sank. He lost all his material, and so he had kind of like a sort of way more difficult life. And I wanted to do a portrait of him out of this is the same oscillatoria. This is him sitting at his study writing. And the thing that I discovered with this is that the algae actually can move, when the oscillatoria is growing, it actually can move material around on the bottom of the tray. I said one time I poured some medium and I didn't filter the salts, and the salts are on the bottom. I said, oh shit, there's all these particles on the bottom. I said, whatever. And I realized that it actually moved the particles around. So then I wanted to aestheticize that a little bit, and I grew this bacteria culture with diamonds, 3 different sized diamonds in the bottom of the tray to see if the algae would move the diamonds around. So it's really pretty hard to see like this, but this is a really close-up. You can see the diamonds that are in the algae and the oscillatoria, and it's actually moving the diamonds around. You can see the halftone of the negative. And what happens is the mucilage membrane at the bottom splits. So it's splitting, and then the other green at the inside is fresh growth that doesn't have any diamonds in it. The diamonds are all carried in the early part of the thicker membrane. Here's another one that's on white glass. This is a sculpture in the Louvre. It's called Mother, Child, and Moths. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's a mother standing there with his son, and she's holding this moth in his hand. There's another one. It's called Bacteria Rule. This is the same process. A friend of mine did this on the computer. I made a halftone and grew this oscillatoria into this. Here's a close-up of the sort of constellations of the oscillatoria as it sort of makes these little colonies, and it kind of splits, and it makes these other little connections to the other colonies. It ends up kind of looking like, this reminds me of constellations. I just put these here because these are awesome cauliflower. I mean, I thought they were amazing. I don't know if you've ever seen these cauliflower. They look like that Mandelbrot set, the fractal thing. It does the exact same thing. This is kind of hard to see. This is a stainless steel engraving of the Discus Thrower. You've seen a million pictures of the Discus Thrower, and I always wondered, well, what does the thing look like from the other side? You only see one picture of the thing ever. Has anybody ever seen the Discus Thrower and walked around it? So I wanted to see what it looked like. So I took pictures all around the Discus Thrower to see what it would look like 10 pictures, and then I did an engraving of each picture with engraved marks in a different angle. Sort of like it kind of came out of the butterfly pieces, where the butterfly scales are all facing in a certain direction, so they turn on and off depending on the orientation. So I did a halftone of each one of these, and I did engraved away all the little halftone dots in one direction for each image, knowing that as you walked by, it would change. So it went from that to that, and then there's a close-up on that side, but the other ones disappear as you're moving around it. So I think it's like seven different images. This is about 40 inches high, 50 inches high by 30 inches wide. This is a greenhouse with trees growing out of it. I've always been interested and looked at like interactions of nature and technology and culture, and seeing this continuous, like, you know, breakdown of, you know, our buildings or whatever, and nature kind of trying to come through it. And I saw this picture one time. I've been taking pictures of this kind of, you know, for a while. Here's a picture. I was in Panama, in Darien, in this old gold mining camp in Cana. It's on the border of Colombia, and my son was always into this Thomas the Tank Engine thing. He was like obsessed with it. And then I came to this place in the middle of the rainforest on the border of Colombia and Panama, and it's like all these small gauge trains in the middle of the forest from the turn of the century. I was like, wow, this is so weird, these small gauge trains in the middle of nowhere. And what happened at the turn of the century, the British went there and they started this huge operation to get gold out of this place. And then, you know, it got consumed, you know, they left, it got consumed by the rainforest. It was just like this jungle now. It's a fabulous birding place. But it's closed now, actually, because the guerrillas from Colombia came over. It's a big route through to bring cocaine. So I was asking about it recently. I asked my friend Andrew. He says, "Oh, you can't go there anymore. It's closed. These guerrillas took the place over, so no one's allowed there anymore." So that's too bad, because it was an unbelievably incredible spot. Well, these are my two kids a long time ago. There's a beaver pond behind my house. There's all this junk in there. Kind of similar to that Cana situation where, you know, upstate, people have been throwing trash around forever, you know, and my next door neighbor used to have this big junkyard in the 70s and 80s, and the city said, you can't have a junkyard in your yard, you have to get rid of all that stuff. So what he did, before I had moved there, there's a pond in the back, and he is a heavy machinery operator, and he just drove all this crap back there and dumped it in the woods. So then the beavers made a pond, and then it filled up, and then this truck was just sitting in the water. So we were skating in the winter on this pond, and my kids were just sitting in this truck, like, hanging out. It gets cold up where I am, and I decided to make an ice sculpture. So this is just a frame with a piece of tarp over the thing. And I just decided I'm going to spray water on it and just leave the water on all the time. It was like, it goes down to 20 below zero at my house, and I'll just spray water on it and it'll get thicker and thicker. Then eventually I'll just take the plastic on the frame out from inside. So I just did that, it got more and more ice on it. And I started putting these ribbons, like that flagging tape, and to get some color in it. And I just sprayed water. Then I took the frame and the tarp out from the inside. That's the central pole that was holding up the tarp. Now it's just a hunk of ice. Got more ice. That's a ice shape that was coming out of the water spout that was spraying. Of course, you had to put lights in it, so I put some lights in it and took a bunch of pictures with the lights in it. This is over the whole winter. I just basically sprayed water on it the whole winter. It's hanging out. That's a really cold day. That's about 20 below zero day. This is not a 20 below zero day. That's a warm day. That's a hole that was caused by some water leaking into it from the hose. Weird ice shapes. There's so endless crazy ice shapes. And then it started to melt, and then icicles started forming inside the igloo, and then you could see the sky and the pink coming through. There were holes, and there were these pink icicles. It was totally pink. It was my daughter was like, wow, it's so pink in here. This is starting to melt. This was a really weird photograph because, do you see that thing up on the right-hand side? It's like a diamond shape with like a round orby thing. And it looked like the kids were looking at it. I was like, what the heck? It's just a field with like trees. I said, what is that thing? And for years I couldn't figure it out. I was like, what is that? Are they looking at that? Is that something that just appeared? It was like the weirdest thing. This is, I think, melting. Melting more. And that's all melted. And now these are from the farm across the street. These are salt licks. There's a farm across the street. The farm, Elsa has this sheep pen. She has these salt licks in there, and I used to take the kids over there, look at the sheep, and hang out in her house with the lambs in the winter. And she died recently. She was 100 years old. She was born in that house, and she died in that house at 100 years. So it was kind of amazing. But then I said, I like these salt licks. Can I just change the salt? And she says, yeah, then you don't have to pay $10 for every block of salt. So I just would go over there and I would take these blocks and I put them in there and I'd go over and check it out. It's like when I liked them, I would just take them, put a new one. So I configured them in a couple different ways. I have about 30 of these blocks at this point. They just kind of remind me of, I don't know, teeth or icebergs, or I don't know. I think they're very beautiful. This is one of my kid Kaz's stuffed animals in this block. He's about 4. And that's the thing about having kids, they do these crazy things. It's like, wow, that's really cool. Then he did this one. I said, that's really cool. Man. But I mean, I guess Mike Kelly might have thought of that. I don't know. Then I started working with anthracite. And here's a beaver stump. This beaver's behind my house, so I like the stumps. So when they start to chew on the stump, I know that they want to cut it down to use it for food in the winter or to use it on their dam. So I would just cut it down for them, and I would take the stump, and then they could chop up the rest of it and take it and eat it. And I was working with this anthracite. I got this piece of coal, and I was making a joke with my kids one day, and I got some coal to put in their stockings. And I was looking at it, I was like, wow, this coal is so beautiful. I bet I can polish it I know it would polish to a mirror finish. It's so shiny. So I got some coal. I went up to Pennsylvania. I got this anthracite from the middle of Pennsylvania. It was really kind of hard to find. I finally found this person. Anthracites, that's the biggest anthracite area is in the middle of Pennsylvania. There's a lot of bituminous coal and subbituminous in other parts of the world, but not anthracite. It's the highest carbon, very hard. Not very hard relative to granite or something, but the hardest coal. So I wanted to make this snowman out of this coal. So I made this snowman. I made a few things. I made these light bulbs. I made this gutter and a bowling ball. I made the gutter out of limestone with these copper rods. So I have kind of like a gutter ball of bowling, I guess. This is just a mirror out of mosaic with a coal. It's in a gallery. You can see some people standing in the back there. Some puddles. It's about like 6 by 3 inches, kind of small. This is about 40 inches by 30 inches by 9 inches thick. This is a big piece of coal. And I've always, I was sitting on the dock and my friends said, I was throwing pebbles in the water. Everybody's throwing pebbles in the water and watch the ripples. And I always think they're just so beautiful how the ripples go through each other. And it's just kind of amazing and so like impossible to kind of carve. And I was like, how could I make one of these coal pieces with these ripples? So I found a friend that had a Rhino program on the computer. I said, can you model some of these ripples? He says, yeah. And he said, how high do you want them? And I said, here's a bunch of pictures I took. And so it was kind of great. You could just model them, and then you could put them different places. He said, what do you want? I said, I would just work with them and say, put one over here, make this one bigger, make this one smaller, make this one not so high, make it really subtle. So he made this configuration, and I went to this stone fabricator near me that usually they do countertops and stuff. And I said, can you machine this, stick this program into your computer and just like machine this low relief? And it's only a 3-axis machine, but he could carve it because it's only very low relief. So he machined it. It was really coarse, and I had to sand it like crazy to 1500 grit and then polish it. So it was tons of hand sanding. This one is actually out of granite because the coal one is too soft to go outside. It's a really indoor piece because it can't get wet and it's all kind of cracky. I kind of like the surface better, and the mirror is just incredible, the blackness of it. But the granite can go outside, so he did another one out of granite. And it kept screwing up and screwing up. It was such a nightmare. And then finally he did it, and I said, okay. So then I sanded on it for 2 years and took it from 80 grit. I had to redraw some of the circles with my compass with a Dremel on it. It was a total pain in the ass. But eventually it came out nice, and I polished it. It looks nice. And one night I was watching the eclipse. It was a lunar eclipse one night, and I was waiting for it. And I was out there with my son. I said, look at the moon in this piece. And so I started taking pictures of the moon reflecting in this ripple piece. And it looked kind of, beautiful, like it was more like outer space or something. It really took on this different sort of look with the moon. Here's some more beaver stump pieces. This is a bunch of pieces bolted together with these brackets, beaver pieces, beaver stumps. Another tree piece. This is an American elm that was killed by elm bark beetle. There's so many diseases with the trees up where I am. There's the emerald ash borer that's killing all the ashes. Dutch elm disease has killed a lot of the elm trees. There's still some big elm trees around, and people maintain them and give them systemic fungicide or, treat them in some way. So this is a Princeton elm. There's an elm in Princeton, New Jersey that's supposedly resistant to the Dutch elm disease. So of course the garden industry marketed it. They took cuttings of it and they're selling it as Princeton elm, the elm tree that's not going to get Dutch elm disease. So I bought one. I planted it, grew for like 6 years, and then I got Dutch elm disease. So then I cut it down and I made a sculpture out of it. I filled in all the galleries, they call them, those patterns made by the elm bark beetle. And I have the tag coming on the string with the original tag coming out of the tree that was on the branch right there. And at the same time I was doing the charcoal pieces, I was making these, the coal pieces, I was making these charcoal pieces. So I always liked to draw with charcoal when I was a kid, but I always liked the charcoal. The charcoal was so beautiful, and it was so shiny and reflective, and it reminded me of those butterfly wings. So I decided to start making charcoal in my wood stove in this box, and I experimented with a bunch of different kinds of charcoal. And this one is called Target Orientation. It's the same orientation as the that little butterfly piece with the target behind it. And I cut all the squares of the charcoal so the grain would be at different angles. So I had like 5 or 7 different pieces with different angles, making a spiral. That's when you walk by it, you can see it's kind of like a spiraling. This is a close-up of some of the knots in the middle. I wanted to have the middle kind of more like a space nebula or something. So the middle has a higher percentage of knots. So I experimented with a bunch of different woods for how shiny they were. And so a lot of the hardwoods don't come out so good, even like mahogany or teak or, ebony. I tried a whole bunch of different ones and they don't really have much reflective quality. But this is just pine from Vermont, which was really pretty nice. And this is a piece called 3 Trees. It's like 7 feet high by 4 feet wide. And this is only 2 kinds of wood. It's mahogany and white pine from Vermont. And all the mahogany is horizontal, and all the white pine is 45-degree angles. So you get this specific kind of pattern with the 2 different woods. This is all kinds of woods made out of sticks. I made these long pieces, and I tried burning them and making charcoal, but they would all bend. So instead of trying to fuss over the fact that they were all bending, I just decided to do this kind of Van Gogh-ish kind of pattern, using all the radiuses of all the little pieces. This is about 60 inches wide by 30 inches high. I guess each one of those pieces is maybe about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. There's another butterfly piece. This is called left forewing, right hind wing, kite and shift. So if you look at a butterfly, it has 4 wings. So the top piece, the top half is all the upper left wing, and the bottom half is all the lower hind wing, all face in the exact same direction. So as you walk by it, you get 2 different shifting patterns that go opposite. Pretty hard to see in just a still picture. So here's one of the pictures of my yard. I'm going to show a bunch of pictures of my yard because I've been managing it for 16 years, and I have to clean out the chimney every year, so for the wood stove. So I go up on the roof and I clean out the chimney and take some pictures. So there's a few different pictures of just different points, different times, different dates. Some of them are old, some of them are new, some of them are fall, some are spring. This is like a picture of brush hogging an area to keep this kind of dynamic mosaic going. Because it's going into succession, which is interesting to me. I have 185 species birdlets for the yard, and I have a lot of plants. I plant a lot of plants, and I kind of edit plants. Some of the invasive ones I edit, and then some of the other ones I kind of try to help along. So sort of managing it in a sort of passive way, but I'm basically just trying to keep it dynamic and not letting it grow into just a forest. Already it's growing pretty fast, and some parts of it are growing into second growth, which is nice to have some second growth, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit more in succession. That's my house. This is kind of the garden around my house. It's got various native things. There's a kestrel box I have in the middle of the field. The kestrel's kind of like an open country, like grassy stuff, so I'm brush hogging some of it so it goes back to a little bit lower plant life, grassy and some weeds and some swamp milkweed, different things. A kestrel is kind of it's kind of having a hard time. There used to be many more of them, and I don't know if it's the nesting cavities are disappearing, but it's a little falcon. It's like a peregrine falcon, there's merlins, and then there's kestrels. This is a beautiful little kestrel, and they nest in this box every year. This is the John Burroughs. These last two slides are the John Burroughs naturalist group. I don't know if you know John Burroughs. He's a very famous naturalist. He hung out with John Muir. John Muir was the West Coast person, and Burroughs was the East Coast person. He wrote a lot. He hung out with Walt Whitman. He has a place called Slabsides near me where he wrote about natural history. And there's a birding group in the back of my yard walking around birding in the spring. There's a 15-year-old beaver pond that's grown into a meadow now. It's good for some birds, so this is what bird watchers look like when they're birding. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay.